Hello, you wonderful people. So for today's video, I want to talk about, it's kind of a conversation about my adventures with Superman, but it's also just kind of a general conversation about Clark Kent and Lois Lane's relationship. I can't remember what video I was watching, but someone had made this remark, I think specifically about my adventures with Superman. They hadn't seen the show, they'd only seen clips, and they saw that, I guess, that the show was focusing so much on Clark and Lois's relationship, and they were like, that is kind of not an important part to focus on. Like, the important part to focus on is the Superman stuff, which I completely disagree with, and that's why I'm making this whole video, because I just thought it was kind of an interesting topic point, was because, I mean, because first and foremost, that show in its design is very, like, I mean, that show's kind of like this action adventure, science fictional, romance, slice of life drama, because it really focuses mainly on the, yes, there's the Superman aspect of it, but it is mainly a Clark Kent show with like Superman elements to it, because it's more so about him, once again, trying to discover who he is and his identity and his relationship with Jimmy and Lois, and how his discovery of himself, journey of self-discovery at this point in time, how it affects him. And like I said, someone had this point. Once again, this person hadn't seen the show yet, but I just thought it was kind of an interesting conversation, like I said, to jump off from, of like them saying like that wasn't an important part to focus on, which I thought was complete and utter nonsense, because Clark and Lois's relationship is a fundamental part of, I would assume, I mean, and maybe this is just my assumption, it feels like it's a fundamental part of most of Clark's stories, you know. And I'm also basing this on, I'm not the well-versed comic book person. I'm only basing this mainly on like the Superman properties I've seen, whether it's like the animated stuff, or whether it's like a Smallville or Superman and Lois and so on and so forth. I mean, using Superman and Lois, for example, their relationship is a fundamental part of that show. It's one of the core foundational aspects of the show. Not only them as a couple, but also them and their dynamic as parents. So it's like, to kind of say that's not important to focus on, because I think when people think like, oh, the Superman stuff, it's like, oh, you're just going to focus on the Superman stuff. It's like, no, you got to focus on the human side of things, because if you don't, that's why so many people have issues with Superman. They're like, oh, he's boring, he's overpowered, yada, yada, yada. That's why my adventures with Superman kind of like depowering him a little bit also kind of makes it kind of interesting. But once again, that's also taking like this very like anime approach, especially with like the romance angle. They're really taking like a very anime approach, or just kind of like the, oh, will they, won't they, and they're so into each other, but they're just kind of awkward around each other. It's a very adorable thing that kind of has this very like anime feel to it. I mean, the entire show has this very anime vibe to it on purpose. It's designed to kind of have that feel, because it has that anime inspired style and vibe to it. Because to me, and you know, maybe this is just me, but I feel like Lois's relationship with Clark is just as fundamental for his journey as Superman, and even his journey as Clark Kent, just as much as John and Martha Kent are as well. Because saying like Lois' relationship with Clark isn't important to me is this equivalent of saying like, oh, his parents' relationship with him doesn't matter, even though they are the core foundational piece of why Clark is the way he is. I mean, that's why you have stories like Red Sun showing you like, hey, who is Superman if he wasn't raised by the Kents? I mean, there's plenty of stories that do that, but obviously that's like the most popular one. But I feel like Lois is in that same ballpark, because his relationship with Lois grounds him, because his whole thing is like, right, he needs to be humanized, he needs to kind of have that human connection, especially to have someone who is there with like the help with both sides of him and challenging him on both sides of himself, whether it's him as Clark Kent or whether it's him as Superman, whether that's pre her knowing this or post her knowing his secret identity, because both of those dynamics on both sides of the relationship end up playing such a fundamental part. I mean, even using my adventures with Superman, it's kind of spoilerish, but not really, that, you know, before, you know, at one point in time, because Lois doesn't know, that Clark is Superman, that, you know, she has this very distinct perspective on Superman, but has this other very distinct perspective on Clark, and those two, like, collisions of how she views one versus the other, because once again, she doesn't know, they are one and the same, and how Clark also kind of internalizes that, and how that makes him feel about the division of himself between Clark Kent and Superman. But like I said, any other story of just like, oh, her, like, also their relationship post all of that as well, and how that changes and how that affects him. I mean, and I'd also make the argument with like Smallville as well, but I mean, maybe you could make the argument like, well, that show kind of leaned into like the teen drama of it all. I mean, obviously they grew up into their adulthood, but he'd known Lois since high school, and they ended up like, but like that relationship like has been was a fundamental part of that storytelling as well. Like I said, I could easily be coming from a place of ignorance, but from my perspective, it just feels so oblivious to kind of discount that relationship, kind of saying like it's not important. It's like it's such a fundamental part of Clark's relationship. I mean, that's even why, you know, the little we know about James Gunn's Superman movie, it feels like he's leaning into that too, that it is like it is a fundamental part. Like you can't have the Superman story without, you know, Lois at some point in time. Obviously, like, he's had many love interests, but I'm not well versed in all of them. The only ones I really know are Lana Lang, and Lois is the one that definitive relationship. Like, when I think of comic book relationships, I think Clark and Lois. Though, I mean, my first and foremost is Peter and MJ, but then I think of, you know, Clark and Lois. Like, to me, those are like the power couple dynamics and stuff like that. So, like I said, I don't know. Like, it would, like I said, I like so wholeheartedly disagree with this person's comment on that part, that I was just like, oh, I thought it was just kind of an interesting topic. So I'd love to get to know your thoughts. Do you agree with that person? I mean, we could use My Adventures with Superman as a focal point because it is a more recent Superman adaptation that really leans into the back and forth between Clark and Lois. I mean, once again, and even, you know, their dynamic with Jimmy, but it is a core aspect of that show, and, you know, obviously no spoilers, but how that's developed, where the show currently is at the time of me recording this, you know, like, do you traditionally believe, like, Lois and Clark's relationship isn't important? And I'd also love to know, what is your experience with Superman? Do you just watch some movies and TV shows? Do you have comic book knowledge to kind of back up your perspective on it, you know? Not like that invalidates your opinion or anything, but that might make me go like, oh, so you're more well-versed in the comics, so you might have a wider berth of knowledge than I would. So, like I said, I just love to get everyone's perspective on it. I'd love to see, do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? I'd love to get to know your thoughts. Really, that's all I wanted to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and good